In the new white paper that Matrix and the People Space have produced, we're highlighting that 80% of employers are struggling to find workers with the right skills. So how do you think a sort of a blended workforce, an agile workforce, can help address this challenge?
So I think a blended and agile workforce can help employers fill their skills gaps, which we see every day with the employers that we work with, because it just gives you a broader, deeper, wider pool of talent to source from. As we've seen worker preferences change, many skill sets, many people are choosing not to be permanent employees, but still have very valuable skill sets that actually, by having that total view of talent as an employer, you can then continue to have access to those important and often rare skills.
And what we're finding this year in particular is there's a big push on productivity, you know, the economic uncertainty, and then we've got technological advancements like AI. How do you think that sits with the blended workforce? How does that help to create more flexibility and resilience in organisations facing such economic challenges?
Yeah, look, I think a blended and agile workforce really, helps organisations be more flexible in how they deal with financial challenges and opportunities. Frankly, right? I know there's clearly focus at the moment on some of the negative trends in the marketplace, but all these things go in cycles, and it will become a positive trend in due course. And actually building flexibility into an overall workforce approach is what we're seeing. I think more and more organisations firstly have a greater proportion of their workforce as some kind of flexible worker, which is giving them the ability to flex up and down as per not just sort of financial performance requires, but also as is needs across an organisation as they continue to grow and develop.
Yeah. And one of the things that we're seeing, of course, with this need for finding the right skills and the fact that there are the real big skills gaps is the fact that employers not only have to look at the wider blended workforce, but they also have to look at a different way of hiring. And one of the things that we're talking about a lot is skills-based hiring. So if you put that skills-based, more dynamic approach together with the gig working, the flexibility, do you think that businesses are really ready to embrace this?
I mean, it's difficult, right, to say across the whole piece. So as an average, maybe not. So I think businesses have made very great progress in being ready to embrace this, right? Embrace a more agile workforce, and I think we see that with some of the clients that we work with. But I think when we talk to senior HR leaders, I don't think many would argue that this isn't something that's on their agenda, that's important about how they think going forward. And I think the helpful unintended consequence of some financial challenges at the moment is financial challenges tend to force an increase in the speed of change in organisations. So I think actually, whilst businesses on average have got work to do, I think the current financial climate will be forcing sort of HR leaders and businesses to accelerate their investment in this space.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you've got that economic environment, and then, as we've said, we've got the rise of this contingent workforce at the same time. There's statistics saying that up to 40% of the global workforce could be independent workers by the end of this year. What do you see are key drivers behind that shift?
Well, absolutely. The rise and the growth and the shift towards independent workers is only accelerating, and I think we're seeing a number of factors drive that. I think there's some table stakes, some basics around just the technology's better these days. It makes the whole facilitation piece sort of work differently. I'm working remotely currently, right? And not my usual office space, right? That's kind of how and you would never know, right? So I think that's very helpful. But I think then there's a balance between organisations wanting more cost-effective, more flexible solutions as they build this agile and blended workforce. But also, actually, I think for many employees, many of the workers, it gives them an opportunity to achieve a better work-life balance, get greater autonomy in how they work, get greater career flexibility. So I think it's one of those beautiful things where everybody wins.
Do you think that it's something that younger generations in particular are keen on? And do you think that's going to make a difference to the sort of this agile workforce, this blended workforce, people coming in and out of the workforce in a different way than we used to have?
I think young people will and do have a very different view of work. I'm a parent of a 21-year-old and a 20-year-old, right? I can tell you their expectations and attitudes to work are very different to what mine were, and it's where I feel like a dinosaur all of a sudden in terms of, and I think I'm a reasonably progressive, leader and worker. But look, I think these generalisations are always tricky, right? I think that this doesn't apply to all young people. Actually, some young people still want to follow a very structured career path, want to become accountants, want to become an IT professional, where there's a high skill base. But we do see a large number of young people, and I think it probably comes back to the previous discussion about achieving a better balance in their life. I think seeing and they've grown up in an area, a very stable era in reality, and are able to, are now having to sort of created an attitude and expectation set that was probably quite different to ours. I mean, I was, in the 70s and 80s and whatever, and growing up, it was not a stable environment, certainly in the UK. There were strikes and strife and high inflation and all of those things. Whereas largely the people who are entering the workforce now in the sort of early 20s have only really known growth. And so I don't think that, I think that's just created an environment where their expectations about work will be and how they want to choose to interact with work. They feel like they've got more freedom to choose. I certainly know when I grew up, I felt like, well, I had to get a job because I needed a job and I needed to keep a job and that stuff. And I think some of the attitudinal change and differences has been driven by the environment that they've grown up in.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And, employers are going to need to, consider this when they're looking at their talent strategies. But you obviously speak to many employers in your role, and your business does. What do you think some of the biggest misconceptions are about contingent workers?
I think probably the biggest misconception that employers have about contingent workers is around their probably their lack of commitment to the company. It's only temporary, right? So how much could you really care? And I think I think there's two things that sit around that, right? Is that firstly, lots of contingent workers are are experts, are highly specialised, and actually they may not be quite as proud as the organisation they work for, but they're absolutely proud of their skill set and their reputation. So they're perhaps driven by a slightly different motivation, but they're super committed to doing a good job. And also, frankly, then you're only as good as your last job in temporary workers, right? With how people are referenced. That more transient work adds actually more pressure to the individual to deliver a great job, because I know what I do when I hire a specialist. I'll phone their last two or three, and my team will phone their last two or three, and were they any good? And so actually, the quality of referencing around contingent is more important, and therefore the worker. So I think that's a grossly unfair view of contingent workers. And then I think probably from a practical point of view, again, I think lots of organisations have a view that managing contingent workforce is too hard. It's complicated. It's kind of, we know how to manage permanent, they come in, people last on average 2 to 5 years, and we roll and da-da-da-da. It's quite straightforward, right? Whereas contingent is much more frequent, and a lot of HR services, HR functions in organisations aren't set up to deal with that pace and that agility. And I think that's where our technology and the services we offer, and particularly Matrix and others, right, can help organisations remove some of that complexity so that it becomes a bit more manageable.
So let's move on to the role of AI in workforce strategies. We look at AI not just as a tool, but actually a vital part of a blended workforce. So how do you see AI reshaping workforce planning and talent management?
I think AI is transforming the whole of the workforce, or it's certainly increasingly, but specifically, I think it's beginning to have a material impact on workforce planning, analytics, data, automation of tasks, talent matching, CV reading, document checking, right? So the whole process, we're starting to see AI become, frankly, usable or quite, good enough to, there's been a lot of hype and a lot of overpromise and a fair amount of underdeliver. But actually, I think it's beginning to become a really serious tool and a really serious part of that kind of whole workforce planning and enablement tool. And actually, frankly, without it, I think it's very difficult to deliver an agile and blended workforce. I think it's a critical component of an organisation's ability to be able to do that at scale. So because it just helps streamline, speed up, make easier the whole process from both the employee and the employer perspective.
And what are you doing at Matrix in terms of AI and bringing that in to your products and services first, and then perhaps to your business as a leader the other way?
Yeah, look, crikey, we're doing it's a big investment stream for us, like everybody else. We are piloting some of the things, some technologies around AI that I've already mentioned around document screening in particular. Matrix is a workforce and compliance company, so we're working on how we can streamline some of that process. Is the main things that we're doing at the moment. I can't say too much just yet around the specifics, but it's a big part of how we're trying to both make our own internal operations more efficient, faster, cheaper, better, but also then in the discussions we're having with customers, particularly new customers we're working with, around how we can blend that into the service. To again, when I talk about product innovation, I generally talk about faster, cheaper, better. They're sort of the holy trinity, right, in terms of what we're trying to achieve. And AI's got an opportunity to help us do that.
If we were able to bring in AI, and that would give us better visibility and data and knowledge of this stuff, but what do you think it means for people? How does this improve the people side of a business?
I think from the people side, AI is going to help a few things, right? So if you take a step back to the comment I made earlier about removing bias. So I think the more data we can become, the better that is. Whether that's your, trying to get into a company, or you're already an employee, or just having a fair and more balanced, more diverse, more open, data-driven kind of discussion. I'm a massive believer in. I'm a direct marketer by training, right? Marketer, right? So I'm from the school of if you can't measure it, don't do it. And I think, actually, in our business, one of our challenges is we've got so much data. We're placing literally thousands and thousands of people every week. Actually, being able to interpret that data to understand how we can optimize it is a big sort of manual task. And where AI is really starting to help us is to help accelerate that, so that we can deliver insights to our customers and deliver better workers, better matching, more saving, whatever is most important to the customers, just much more quickly and much more proactively.
And compliance is a big issue, especially with different employment laws, and of course new employment laws coming in the UK as well imminently. It's an area very well at Matrix. So how can you stay as a company compliant with all these changes while maintaining that sort of flexibility?
So compliance is increasingly complicated. It just is, right? And it's increasingly important to organisations because obviously there are both sort of legal, financial and reputational risks around non-compliance that organisations take very seriously. And actually in our experience, it's probably in some ways taken more seriously than some of managing, planning the workforce and some of the things that we've talked about, right? In terms of it's very high. This kind of the compliance of workforce often is on the chief exec agenda, right? Not just the HR leader, right? And it's very difficult. I I wouldn't advocate it to some degree, unless it's for the very largest organisations, for them to try and do it themselves. There's a degree of a degree of change and complexity that makes this a full-time job for a number of people if an organisation really wants to be expert in this stuff. So I hope you'll forgive me. It's a little self-serving, right? But I don't mean it to be. It's working with the right partner in understanding and managing the process around compliance, I think, is critically important, and particularly around also connecting the themes, right? As the workforce becomes more blended and more agile, the pressures and complexity around being compliant also multiply. It's why as Matrix, we bought a large compliance business a couple of years ago, because we saw those two things blending and coming together in the client discussions. Yes, I want to be more blended and more agile on my workforce, but I'm really scared about the compliance risk that exposes me to. How can you, Matrix, our partner in this, help us solve that problem? Well, good news is we can help you solve that problem now, because we're good at both.
So, which brings me nicely to a final question, which is for HR leaders who want to build a more blended, more agile workforce, but they just don't know where to start. What's sort of your top piece of advice, or maybe your top 2 or 3 pieces of advice to start this journey?
I think I'd start by trying to identify the gaps. What's the problem I'm trying to solve? Have I got gaps in cost? Have I got gaps in a variability of workload? Have I got gaps in skill set? Or have I got all of them, right? And trying to be really specific and structured in trying to understand where a more agile, where contingent, however you want to describe it, a more blended workforce can help you solve some of those problems. And so I suppose in shorter form, it's sort of having a plan, right? And trying to come at that then, and then that will help, I think, guide the next set of decisions that need to be made around who you partner with, what technology you use, how you maintain a consistent culture and set of values across a more flexible workforce, and how then, and how and who you choose ultimately to partner with to help manage the bits of that process that are sort of important, but not what the HR leader and HR team should be focusing on, right? That's the stuff that organisations like Matrix and others, right, can do. So to free up the time for HR leaders to focus on the constant iteration of what a great workforce looks like.